That was good. That was fun. We should do that again. Next week, same time, same place. I'll be here. I hope you are too. We are starting this series that's called Binge the Bible. And I am so excited for this because what we've heard and what we're seeing is that you just have this desire to know our God, to know Jesus more. And we want to meet you in that. And we thought that maybe the best way to do this is the series called Binge the Bible. And what we're going to be doing each week then is setting it up where someone's going to come up and talk hopefully like 7 or 8 minutes about a Bible or about a time period in the Bible. Super topical. I get to hone in on my lovely teaching skills that I just lost. So I'm sorry if I'm boring. Maybe that's why I lost my job. No, I didn't lose it. That's why I guys quit. Anyways, the second part, though, I think is going to be really fun, is that we're going to have different speakers come up and say, okay, I've heard this story in the book of the Bible. How does that play in my life? Like, how have I committed the same sins? How have I seen the same love or the same hope? And so that's how the rhythm of these nights is going to go, where we are focusing on this word of testimony this year. It's a fancy word, but it's just a written statement of truth or a spoken statement of truth. And we're going to spend it where we'll spend part of it looking at God's testimony, the Bible that he has given us, the word that he's got, and then how does that match our testimony, our story, the truths that we're seeing with God? So you ready? You with me? Okay, thank you. So we start in Genesis, which is called the book of beginnings. And I love it because you're like, yeah, I have wondered, where did it all begin? Right, we ask this of like, where did it begin with the earth or the world? But we also ask like, where did humans begin? Where did sin begin? Where did hope begin? And this book is a way to walk us through answering kind of those questions that we have about where did it all begin? So what we've got is a way for us to kind of talk through what happens in the book of Genesis. It's a big one. They're like, if you should read the Bible, start at the beginning. You're like, awesome, this book's 50 chapters long. Okay. But my goal is to walk you through the main points that happen in this so that if you're curious, then you kind of go back in and read Genesis and figure out like more about what's going on. So full credit goes to Pastor Marty Schmidt, as I took this from him. And I was just like, do we watch his video? And I was like, I feel like they're tired of the video. So I'm going to do my best to state the topics, walking you through what happens in the book of Genesis. So it's broken up into 2 sections. The first section is really just chapters 1 through 11. And I should preface, we don't have like note sheets. We put out journals to say if you want to take notes, great. If you don't want to take notes, great. This is all up to you for whatever you want to intake. Genesis starts, chapters 1 and 2 is creation. And the beauty of this first part is looking at where God takes something that was dark and gives it light. Something that was chaotic and disorganized and brings order to it. And at the end of it, we get to hear that everything was good. And you're like, man, can I stop reading now? Everything is good. Because we turn the page to chapter 3, and this is now the fall. The humans that God had created, Adam and Eve, they just sought after more, like that God wasn't worth it or he wasn't trustworthy enough. We have that they take from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They eat it. The serpent tempted them. It's a really sad story. And because of their sin, this is when sin begins. This is a time where they didn't keep their connection with God. They missed the mark. And because of that, every sin has a consequence. And so we read these consequences, and yet in there is our first promise that somebody's going to come and remedy this. Somebody is going to redeem this. Somebody's going to save this. Someone's going to fix this sin. And so already in chapter 3, we have a fall, but we have a promise. So what happens, Adam and Eve are then kicked out of the garden, and one of the things God told them to do was have babies, and they did that really well. So they had babies, and their babies had babies, and their babies, and the babies, and the babies, and the babies, and the babies, and so the world populates. And unfortunately, the world doesn't populate for good. It starts to populate more evil. And so we have then, in our next section, is this guy named Noah, which you possibly heard about, where he was a righteous man before God, and God chose him to build the ark, get the animals, because it's almost like this first baptism idea that he had to wash the earth clean. And so he does that. And so once again, Noah and his family and all the lovely animals, they make it through. And the command is the same. have babies, populate the earth. So we do it again. Everybody has kids, everybody has kids, everybody has kids. And they're filling the earth, doing just as they're told. And in one place, they build a city. And in this city is a tower. So this is the fourth thing, is that there's the Tower of Babel. And once again, they're trying to say, we want to be like God. We want to make some of those decisions. And so they build this tower to get up to God. And God's like, I don't know about that. And so he disrupts them by creating languages. And so this is the beginning of languages. And it scatters the people, and the tower doesn't make it. And this is your first section. I really kind of think of it as like the story or the beginnings of mankind. Just like as a whole, like what's going on. And so the second part of Genesis, though, as opposed to looking at humanity as a whole, focuses in solely on one family. And so this is where we have these four big names of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And God chose Abraham because he did. He was just like, we're going to take this guy and tell him to start walking. And so over time, it's amazing that Abraham really becomes God's friend, and they learn about this. And there are many strives and issues, but through Abraham is that promised one. The promise that was made in chapter 3 that somebody's coming to fix this is going to come through the line of Abraham. And so the rest of Genesis really looks through is how is this affecting this family of Abraham, who had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob, technically Jacob and Esau. There's a little disunity there. And then Jacob went and had 12 sons of his own and a daughter. And I really was looking at Genesis, and it's like, it is family dynamics to a T. We have lying, we have deception, we have betrayal, we have people throwing each other into pits. Like, please don't do that. Even if you don't like your little brother, please don't dig a hole and toss them in there. And so this is what happens to Joseph, is that he is the 11th son in line. And quick side note, the fourth son of Jacob is Judah. You want to tuck that guy in your back pocket. Be like, I'm going to need to remember that. Not today, another day. We're going to focus in on Joseph, who is the 11th son of Jacob. So if you're thinking of hierarchy, he should be the lowest, but his dad loves him the best. And so what happens is then the brothers get really mad that they're not loved as much, and they throw him in a pit, and they're like, well, maybe we shouldn't kill him, but we'll just sell him into slavery. So they sell him into slavery into Egypt. More bad things happen to this guy, Joseph, until God has his hand on him the whole time. You should read it. Joseph's legit. And what happens is through a crazy scene of events, Joseph is able to describe the visions that the Pharaoh of Egypt is having, and is able to basically say, hey, you're going to have a famine. And Joseph, I love this. He's like, you should find somebody that is going to help you with this. And Pharaoh's like, well, you seem like the guy. So Joseph goes from being in a pit to being second in command in Egypt, which is probably one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful nation of the time. And in this, as it was described in a dream, a famine hits. And so this famine doesn't hit just Egypt. It also hits where Jacob and his brothers were living. And so these brothers end up coming to Egypt. And I mean, you've all seen in the history books where the Egyptians, they got the mad eyeliner. They have, the weird, beard thing that comes in front of them. So they don't recognize Joseph until Joseph just reveals himself to them. And there's this beautiful line that's like, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And Joseph is now able to save his family. He says, come to Egypt, we'll give you food. And that's where Genesis ends. It ends in this place where we have this family that God has chosen. They were supposed to be in a certain land, and now they're in Egypt, and we're wondering what's going to happen next. And key main ideas then from Genesis is that we're learning that there is a promised one. The teaser is it's Jesus. We're going to get there. And at the same time that we learn about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is repeated often in our Old Testament. So this is the overview of Genesis, and what I want us to do then is in this idea of this is the beginning. Again, we're trying a lot of things here in our own beginning, but I really want to bring up Caitlin as another way to say one of the things we're beginning, as I said, is bringing other people to say how the story of Genesis, the story that God is creating in this Bible, affects one of our lives today. So will you give it up for Caitlin?
Yeah, I mean, ton of information, but all good, because it's Genesis is so long, and you, are in it, and you're there's a lot of people's names, a lot of numbers, there's just a lot going on, a lot of mistakes. You're what even is this, So it's kind of crazy that Nancy pointed out our story, right? Our information. And I'm going to kind of wrap it up in how do we create this to be in our own life? And how do we create this to be even in our testimony, right? So, yeah, let's just take a look at a total of four people that I'm going to kind of talk through and wrap it all in my testimony. And so the first off I want to talk about is Adam and Eve. Now, like what Nancy said, is that they were the first to kind of like mess it up. Sorry, Adam and Eve, love you. You're our descendants too, but man, like they made mistakes right out of the gate. Chapter 3, it's like, bang, we just got into this. We're already making mistakes. I'm like, dang. But we see like right at the gate, Adam and Eve, they were in this garden. They were following after God. They only knew like this world that they're living in currently is perfect. And then sin came along. They messed up. They got tempted, right? And that's where the fall came. And I feel like they knew God. They had a relationship with God, and they still messed up. You know, you don't think about that. Like, you have a relationship with God, but you still make mistakes. And that's what Adam and Eve did. They made mistakes, and that's when the fall happened. And I feel like, do you ever make a mistake? Do you ever have a sin, and it makes you have a fall, and you don't even know where to come back from it? You mess up. You're reading your Bible. Okay, so you're reading your Bible every day. You're praying to God, and you're like, doing good. And then you mess up, and you're like, how do I get back up from this? And I feel like that's kind of where Adam and Eve were. They messed up. They made a mistake. Then their world changed. That's when sin came. And that's where everything kind of became chaotic. Okay, let's look at Noah. Noah the ark. This is the guy who's probably in the Bible Hall of Fame. Everybody knows Noah. The man had I don't even know facts, but so many pairs of animals. He had his family. He took on this ark. People saw him build this ark, and they're like, man, you are crazy. Like, it ain't even raining that much. It's sprinkling. No way there's going to be flooding the earth. He's like, what are you doing? But Noah listened to God, heard God, and trusted that God was going to show up. You see, God told him to build this ark because the world was going to flood. And Noah didn't listen to everybody else, but instead was faithful. He trusted in what God was telling him. So, the flood happened, the ark happened, he brings all these animals, he brings his family, and Noah and his family are the only people on the earth. So then they go to land, and then we see that Noah, gets planted on the land, sets his family, starts growing his home. He plants a vineyard, and the man gets drunk. Did you hear me? The man gets drunk. He just succeeded. That was a win, guys. He just survived. And what did he do when he survived? The man got drunk. That's weird. And then it ends there. It ends. And I'm like, what just happened? He just did something good, and then he got drunk. So we see a man like Noah was faithful. He strived after God, pursued God, listened to God. I mean, there's so many good attributes about him. And after he was faithful, he messed up. You see, the Bible has a ton of people, imperfect people, that God chose. And we see a lot of these people in Genesis that God chose. All of the names you just heard, amazing people, strived after God, was just human. And they had a relationship with God, and they messed up. And some of them messed up really bad. And some of the time, I'm like, can we relate this to our own life? I mean, have you ever messed up so bad that you're like, I don't even know how to get back up from this? I don't even know, where to start again. I don't even know, if I can read my Bible again because I messed up so bad and I sinned. And I'm like, I just feel convicted. I just feel like, how can I have a relationship with God again? And I feel like that's part of my story, which I'm going to get into, is I kind of feel like a Noah. I kind of feel like an Adam and Eve. I've grown up in church my whole life. I've gone to the Bridge for a long time. I served here. I've been involved. And then when I got into high school, I was still trying to have a relationship with God, still strive after him every day. Again, then I got into high school. and I was surrounded by a group of people who wanted to go drink and wanted to party. You see in Hollywood, I mean, we watch all these, you watch all these movies, they're in high school, like, ooh, let's go to the swimming pool and, like, party. No, that's not realistic. Hollywood is lying to you. So anyways, I'm thinking, like, this is going to be a fun, classic high school movie back in the 80s where they go to this party and it's super fun. Guys, that's not realistic. So, beginning of high school, you try to fit in, right? You go to this party, and I'm there with this group of people. I'm like, I know you ain't going to church, and I know you do not have the same morals as me. But I wanted to fit in. Like, it's my first time. I wanted to be like I was in a movie, because that's what movies portray to us. Like, this is an amazing life to go and do that. So I go to this party, and I drink, and then I drink, and then I drink. And then I wake up the next morning, and I'm like, what did I just do? You see, I was on fire for God. I fell like Adam and Eve. I had a relationship with God still. But then I fell. I messed up. I got tempted, and I fell into sin. Sounds familiar, right? And then I did not know how to get back up. And I'm like, how do I even get back into the Word after I just did? Like, that night, I just got drunk. And then I feel so bad, but it's almost like I feel unworthy to go back to God. And I feel like this is where you kind of get caught up in, is like, when you sin so much, there creates a gap between you and God, because God is holy. If you were here on Pastor Marty's message last Sunday, he taught through this of like, sin creates a gap between you and God, because God is holy and God is perfect. And when I started sinning, I started creating that gap between God and I. And we didn't have that strong relationship anymore. And I didn't know how to go back. So because I didn't know how to go back, I just kept sinning more. I kept drinking more. I kept hanging out with those friends more. And when you start doing that, that gap between God and I started growing larger and larger and larger. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I'm like, who even am I? Didn't even know who I was anymore. You know, I was still serving in church, guys. Like, I was 1 foot in and 1 foot out. But I was like, God, I know you're there. I still love you. But it's like, I don't want to do that yet. And we see a lot of this in our own lives. We go to church Wednesdays, you go to church Sundays, Mondays now. And on the weekends, you might be falling into stuff because that's the only people you know. That's the only friend group you're surrounded with. Maybe like you feel like you have to like fill a void in your stomach, or you're like, I feel empty, so this is the only way to refuel me again. But I'm telling you, you look in that mirror and you're like, this gap between God and I don't even know who I am. And so that's why I want to kind of point out to you guys today a couple things that helped me on my journey to get back on track, because obviously I'm back on track. Just want to get that clear. But there is a way to get out of it. There is a way to stop looking at your friend group and being like, I can't do this anymore. Because when you start looking at yourself and you're like, ooh, I don't even know what is life about anymore? Who am I? Because it feels purposeless when it's without God, because there's that gap. So here is a couple ways that I did not let my mistakes define me or continue in my life. There's a boundary. Do not let your mistakes define you, but you also got to stop continuing them. So I pulled out of Genesis 17, 1 through 4, and this is about Abraham. Nancy already talked a little bit about Abraham, and so Abraham was the father of Isaac, and then he was married to Sarah. Anyways, we'll get into it. So when Abraham was first called out by God, which God was like, I'm picking you, just like Nancy said. Abraham was first called out by God and his wife Sarah. So Abraham and Sarah are on this journey in life together, and we see throughout his journey, he was sinning like 3 times already. I'm like, God called you out, and he's like, boom, I'm going to lie that my wife is my sister. Excuse me? Like, what? Guess what? He doesn't just do that once. He does that twice. Twice that he lied about his wife being his sister. That's weird, but I guess he was trying to save his life. But, like, he lied. Like, why, dude? In the long run, it's like, that didn't work out for you. Another one he did is he slept with another woman that was not his wife, just to clarify, and she had a baby. Oh, no. You know that man messed up. His wife told him, so his wife, what you need to know, Sarah, his wife, she could not have children. But God promised Abraham before God called him and said, hey, I will give you a son. He said, I will give you a son. But Abraham and Sarah were so impatient, did not trust in God's timing at all. And Sarah, his wife, said, how about you just go with my servant? And guess what the man said? Yes, I'll go with your servant. No, you are the man of the house. Stick your ground, sir. Stick your ground. He did not. That was mistake number 3. To get to the brighter picture, he was picked out by God, and he still made mistakes. And so this is later after his mistakes, and he says, when Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly. Then Abraham fell on his face, and God said to him, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. Okay, so what I got out of that is God first told Abraham, walk with me. That is point number 1. How do you not let mistakes define or continue in your life? Walk with God. That's what the first thing God said is walk with me. And this is a side note of what I think of walk with God. Stop trying to control your life. Stop trying to do it. You cannot handle control in your own life, which sounds crazy, but let God do it. When you start controlling things in your life, it comes rocky, it comes shaky, just like Sarah told Abraham to have a baby with another lady. That got rocky real quick. No, we have to stop letting our control be over God's control. God has us. We just have to trust that God has us. So walk with God. Let him take control of your life. Number 2, this is the second thing God told Abraham was be blameless. So I was in the office, and Angie Allgood was in the office with me. And I was like, what do you think be blameless means? And she said, making sure everything is checked in with God, which means confessing to God and allowing him to take hold of your mistakes and making them blameless in your life. You see, we can't actually give our mistakes and sins to God if we don't confess them to him, which makes us blameless. When we give our mistakes, when we give our sin to God, we have nothing on us because God took it for us, right? So be blameless means confessing your sin. And that's the second thing God told Abraham. And the last thing God told Abraham was that he will be the father of multiple nations. And number 3 is trust what God is telling you. You see, Abraham didn't trust that God was going to give him a child, but God says, trust me, I'm going to give you a multiple of nations. Are you going to trust me this time, though? Because on our walk with God, if God is telling you he's going to do something in your life, I'm telling you, he's going to do it. We just have to trust in God and trust in his timing. But those are just 3 ways of how it helped me on my journey, how to get back on track and not letting mistakes define or continue in my life. But that's that.